There are lots of questions of how to make better use of data in smart homes, how to apply machine learning and AI better for health and social care, how to make sure the data in devices in silos can be interconnected, managed and merged better, but still paying attention to data protection and privacy. On the other hand, there is the issue of reducing health inequalities. Are these devices providing a potential, or are they increasing the risk even further for people who belong to different social classes, or maybe in older age groups, or maybe differently abled or disabled? So we would like to tackle a little bit more on these within the scope. We left the scope of the event as general as possible, but we would like to make sure that these two are touched upon during our event. So what are we aiming for? We are starting with a panel that will basically set the stage for us based on the expertise of people that are going to be coming from various different domains. And hopefully the rest of the day, which is going to be handled in a different team's call, we will be going to ideating around unresolved challenges and emerging problems based on our experience, based on our own domains, based on our own observations, and hopefully create this platform of interdisciplinary co-creation around the digital health topic. Finally, our hope is that your networking, your ideas do not stay here, but you take that forward for future collaborative works. That could be research grants, maybe an idea that forms to become a bigger product. Okay, so that's what we really would like to achieve. And without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to my co-organizer, Stephen Sam, to lead the panel on hacking the digital health. All our panelists are here. If they can turn on their cameras and mics, we can start the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sidem, for that introduction. I would like to start by welcoming our panelists and also welcoming the participants for joining this event. My name is Stephen. I'm also a lecturer at the Department of Computer Science, and I'm co-leading this research group. I also have significant interest in research related to healthcare. And I will be facilitating these discussions. I will briefly start by providing a kind of a general introduction to the panel. Afterwards, the panelists will go in much more detail about their work, and then we start with the questioning. We have about 50 minutes for this panelist discussion, so we would take about 30 minutes of the discussions, then we have 20-minute Q&A. But meanwhile, if you have any questions while the discussion is ongoing, you can put it in the chat. Then afterwards, we can look at those questions as well. So I'm going to start from my right to going from the right on my screen, what I have on my screen with with Ms. Trishna Baraji. Trishna is a multi-award-winning patient engagement consultant and a health advocate working with nationally, internationally to better embed the patient voice into the healthcare ecosystem. Her main area really expertise lies into patient-centered care, co-creation, patient involvement, and ensuring diverse voices are being heard and represented throughout this, and what we often not to ensure that we don't exacerbate inequalities in some of the work that we do. She's won so many accolades. Just to mention briefly of some of them, she is a patron and ambassador for several health and disability-related organizations, and a visiting lecturer on patient engagement at the Center for Pharmaceutical Medicine, King's College. Among her various accolades, again, is that she's been recognized by the UK Prime Minister's Office for a Point of Light Award. And she's also been given a Pharma 100 honorary. So Trista, we welcome you to this wonderful event, and we hope to get much more from your experience. And then I move to our able scholar, which is Dr. David Bell. So he is a reader at the Department of Computer Science. David is keen multidisciplinary researcher who has applied novel digital service solutions in a range of domains, including digital health. His research interest lies in service design, emotional AI, security, semantic technologies, and medical technology, which he often calls short as medtech. In a moment, we'll hear more about medtech. I'm very curious to hear more from David about that. David had also done a lot of work with the NHS, provided support to them, developing tools and so forth. And his recent work has also been commercialized. That's a good news. Congratulations, David, for that. Based on kind of modeling research grant, which he called Heco Analytics Limited at Brunel. Then I moved down to our other honorable Brunel scholar, which is Dr. Hongwin Min. Hongwin is a reader also in Electronic and Electrical Engineering, College of Engineering, Design, and Physical Science. He has previously held research positions in several UK universities. That includes UCL, York University, Southampton, Lincoln, and Dundee, University of the Dundee. His research centre also around AI and health. And also has worked on several AI and machine learning projects funded by notable organizations such as the EPSRC, Royal Society, and so forth. Dr. Meng is also part of a wide range of professional bodies, including IEEE, Transactional Circuit System, IP Transactional Cognitive, and General Chair of the 16th International Conference on National Computation. Dr. Min, we welcome you to will also, my guests will really benefit from your wide experience. And finally, we have Jerry Riley. Jerry, I also want to thank you for joining us. You had over 28 years experience in this field. So I think your panel will be more beneficial to you. So Jerry is also a visiting professor at Brunel University. And also worked with Head Data Research UK as a head data expert. Yeah, and he also had a wealth of experience, like I said, in technology for over 24 years. He served in several leadership positions, including working as a director, CTO, and also a vice president, managing over 750 staff across 17 labs at IBM UK. He's also worked in other organizations such as Sony, Digital Equipment, etc., and so forth. So what I will do is to give the panelists one by one to just tell us a little bit about their work. I've just provided a brief overview in terms of their expertise. So I will start like I started with Trishna. If you can just tell us a little bit about your work, and so that our panelists, our participants will be more beneficial.
Yeah.
Will be more beneficial to the participants.
Thanks. You gave a really great overview, and I always say that it's really difficult to actually explain what I do in a nutshell. So I actually got into this space around 15 years ago as a result of a diagnosis. So I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 28. And the diagnosis experience wasn't great. And that's what really got me into the path of patient advocacy and patient engagement. So it started off initially in MS, but then very quickly sort of expanded to cover lots of different condition areas and also what I call above therapy area, because there are lots of issues that are actually affecting lots of different patient communities. And so I work with health tech companies, pharma companies, contract research organizations, academia, patient organizations, you name it. And so there are several different areas that I really focus on. So one is a good patient engagement practice. So the why, the when, and how to work with patients. Diversity, inclusion, and equity issues in healthcare and the life sciences, which is really about making sure that diverse and representative voices are being heard, and to enable us to have a healthcare system or solutions to work for everyone. I'm also involved with the People's Network at the Professional Record Standards Body, which develops clinical standards for health and care records, which also has relevance to health tech, because we have to make sure that basically all the systems are able to talk to each other. I really want to make sure that anything that's being developed for patients is being developed with patients, because if we do that, then we're going to have solutions that are going to be more effective, more relevant, more targeted, and more appropriate essentially for the end user. So I think my focus today is going to be about getting people to think about, when you're developing solutions, when you're brainstorming, etc., to always have that patient, that end patient user in mind.
Thank you so much for that. I'll come back to you in a moment with a couple of questions. Let me move to Dr. David Bell. Just a bit about your work and yeah.
Yeah, I won't talk for too long. So I've got a few roles. So I'm a reader in computer science, and I'm also a director of a research center on smart technology in health. But I'm going to focus on my role as technology lead, CTO at Heco Analytics Limited. So this was a startup from an Innovate UK grant we had about 7 years ago, and I'm happy over this panel to talk a little about those experiences and challenges and how it differs from academic research. In this startup, we work with, over the last year, probably over 30 companies. Basically, what we do is we combine AI machine learning techniques to health economics. And where I got into this was really my interest in service design, and rather than looking at very generic problems and looking at the health economics around generic problems, I was very interested into the diversity of people, so different patient groups or personas, the journeys they went through, the pathways, and how you can add value, sort of health value, to parts of that journey. So it's very easy to read the newspapers and see the big problems, but underneath those big problems are often smaller problems that are distinct to particular groups. And that has always interested me. So I do a lot of work with companies. It's about identifying those groups and identifying where the most value can be gained from an app, a device, a piece of AI, etc. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks so much, David. I think you kind of almost share, I mean, we all share the same sort of language here, patient center with Tricia, and you're also talking about diversity of people. This is getting more interesting. I'll probably move to Women.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah. So I work in EPRC project before I moved to Brunel. At that time, I was in UCL. So the project is about pain management. So for the doctors, they want to know the pain level of the patient, but sometimes it's not real. Can get the accurate information. So my work is mainly for emotion detection from facial expression, from voice, from the behaviors like different actions or postures and so on. So that is to help the patient, the pain level information more accurate. And currently, I'm a principal investigator in a British Heart Foundation project. It's building the cardiac patient simulator, try to use some AR models like GAN to generate some kind of different scenario signals, and that can help the young doctors training. So in their training, we can use our simulator instead of the real data or real patient, and make them to understand and can see more scenarios without any more cost. And recently, we started a new project was funded by the Royal Society. It's about epileptic seizure modeling and prevention. And in this project, we will use Spark neural network to modeling the seizure happen procedure and try to found the properties and try to provide the prevention tools. So what I want is from the current AR development, I think there are many ways can use AR to update the traditional medical research or the healthcare, and there are lots of things we can do. So in here, I'm happy to provide any possible support for anybody who want to use AR in their situation. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tomin, for that wonderful work that you've been doing around AI and patients as well. So let's move quickly to Jerry. Jerry, you're muted. You're mute, I think so.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you for the kind introduction, Stephen. So I come probably from a slightly different angle. That my background's primarily industry, over nearly 40 years. But the last 5 years, very much in the health data space. My personal interests are around technology, and view that very broadly to support research on secure and ethical research on health data and health relevant data. And particularly, I'd use the term health relevant because a lot of the interesting research around health data today broadens out into things like climate data, social data. So you've got to view health data as broader than sort of medical records or medical imaging. So my interest around the technology to support that. That includes a lot of areas that touch on, actually, Trishna touched on, making sure that what we do is transparent and obvious to the patient communities and clearly for their benefit. It includes work around privacy enhancing technologies, and be very interested in some discussions that might come up through the broad area of privacy enhancing technologies. I'm also interested in the areas that are perhaps slightly less sexy. A lot of the focus on people when they look at startups and hackathons around digital health focus on the areas that might appear very exciting, but actually some of the things that are transformative within the health sector can be things like improving the efficiency of outpatient appointments. Why do people no-show for outpatient appointments? Where does that map to particular communities? So as you're thinking of your ideas, yes, it's great if you can come up with an AI model that's going to assist in the diagnosis of a medical image that might pick up cancer more quickly. But actually, if you solve the problem of no-shows for outpatients, that can really be transformative. So think broadly as we go through the discussions. And the final area that I'm interested in, I sit on the Alzheimer's Research UK scientific advisory board for their early diagnosis of neurodegenerative diseases. I sit on the scientific board of Cumulus Neuroscience. I have an interest in the area of early diagnosis using technology of neurodegenerative disease, so pre-symptomatic diagnosis of neurodegenerative disease. So really looking forward to the discussion over today and next week, and looking forward to see some wonderful ideas come through.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I think we really got a very good mix of specialists here. Dave, Hongwei, and Trishna talking about the technology aspect and the social aspect. That you bringing in that sort of ethical dimension and transparency. And I like the idea that you talked about. We should think broadly. I think this is kind of also we help the participant also in their design over the next 2 days, how they can think broadly, not just about the technology, but also beyond the technology itself and considering the people. I think this will bring me to Trishna again. Trishna, I'm coming back to you. I'm just thinking, in your work, which you do more kind of a more patient-centered, I was just thinking, how do you think people-centered could be integrated into design of innovation, design and uptake of digital innovation in healthcare, particularly in the healthcare space?
Yeah, so basically, just to put it bluntly, it makes sense. often I see in technology, sometimes I see great ideas being created for the sake of great ideas being created, and actually, and I think Jerry, you've really sort of you've already mentioned it. Sometimes the most transformative things aren't necessarily the all singing, all dancing, mind-blowing things. Sometimes what happens is you forget to find out actually what are the problems. What are the things that patients are facing day to day? What are the challenges? What are the pain points? That's what we need to be looking at, because those are the things that are really going to make a difference. Health tech for me is about creating options for people, for patients, whether it's in routine clinical care, whether it's preventative action, so things like early diagnosis, diagnostics in clinical health, using health tech in clinical trials. It's about creating more options for people. Patients are also increasingly being expected to and actually want to take part in shared decision making. You know, we've moved beyond the paternalistic model of healthcare that we had, 30, 40 years ago. I think what technology can really do, and if you have people-centered solutions, is it can help them to become more informed. It can help them to be more in control of their disease. It can then help them to make more decisions that can then have a huge impact on their outcomes. Telemedicine in particular has increased accessibility to specialist care, again potentially leading to better outcomes. I think when we're talking about all of this, we always have to remember, what is it that the patients need? What is it that they want? And that for me is really the crux of the matter when it comes to patient-centered design. Really, it's about making sure that we're actually fulfilling, that we're filling the gaps, we're solving the problems that are important to patients, not things that we think that patients want because something's all singing or dancing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite a very interesting, discussions around putting patients basically at the center of the design. If I can capture that very well, it's about also not just developing tools, but also empowering them and making sure that they're actually able to use that technology. This will bring me back to Jerry. I just want to ask the questions around that related to what Trishna have just said in terms of the privacy governance issues around data that we should consider, because a lot of these AI models require data. Right. From your own experience, what do you think? How do you think we should be able to sort of really address that from a more kind of privacy governance aspect to ensure that data have been shared in a much more fair and transparent way? You're mute again.
Right. Okay. So I've got two sets of muting, and they're fighting over each other.
Okay.
So the first thing to be aware of is to be realistic about data. So anybody working in the health data space will know that actually getting access to data can be a quite painful, long process. So as you go through your thinking today, be aware of that. I'm happy to talk about that. The other thing to pick on is actually make sure that it's very clear you've got a good, strong base of patient advocates. Trishna talked about design. I'm actually going to go further than that. It's one of the things we pushed very hard at HDR UK was the patient community is not there just your design phase. They should be there at the heart of what you do. They should be part of your governance process. They should be part of all aspects of, if you're looking at a project to spin out, make sure that they're at the heart of that. That will help you with your data question. It will also make sure you're focused on, as Trishna said, on the problems that matter rather than nice ivory tower stuff. Be aware there's been a big shift on data. When 5 years ago, when we set up HDR UK, there was still a model for most health data that it was a distribution model. You you got your approval for data access and your data turned up, you did your research on your systems. That model has changed. You are moving into a world where data is being analyzed in what I will call trusted research environments, TREs, what NHS England now calls SDEs, essentially the same thing. You are accessing data in secure environments. You don't have the expectation you're going to receive the data. Also, make sure you understand your data. You understand what data you want, why you want it. Sounds like an obvious statement, but actually, when it comes to data access, that is what's going to get you through the process quickly. We are in a world that is changing quite rapidly. So you do need to be aware of what's going on, in particular if you're looking at data that is routinely collected, data from inside the NHS. You need to be aware of what the situation is around secure data environments, and also look to link up with those. This is Brunel, you've got a wonderful, rich set of trusts in West London. Look to find people you can work with and collaborate with. But go back to it, you're doing this for your patients. It is their data. They're loaning you their data to do the research. So I think at the heart of this is make sure that everything you do is very obviously got patient benefit at the heart of it. Because when you go to look to secure access to data, that's the very, very first thing that a data access committee is going to look at, is what you're proposing to do have that benefit. And as I said, and we can raise this on questions in a while, Stephen, also be very realistic. It's not easy it's not easy, and it shouldn't be easy to get access to health data. So you've got to be patient, understand what you're doing, and understand how the system works.
Thank you so much for that, Jerry. I'm going to get a little bit out of that data and talk much more in technology in a kind of a more broader context. I'm starting with Dave and Hongwei. Let me start with Dave for you. Now we're talking about the idea of technology and data in the context of the individuals and their communities, which basically the healthcare setting. I was just thinking, how can health technology enable the transformation of this healthcare delivery to support this individual that we're talking about within their communities, either in the healthcare or either at home?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I agree with Gary. So at the moment, so the project, almost everything when we use for AR is about data. You have to have got some data, and especially the data may be sensitive because they are private data from the patients. And so the first project I attend is the EPRC project, and that stage we have 4 partners, but we do not have any partners from social science or from the ethics side of the other side. So all about technology or medicine, patient, medical partners. But recently we are developed some proposals, and we always have some partners from like the ethics law and from the other partners. So in this case, I mean, the data is very sensitive, and we just need the data and on the clear purpose. And also in the proposal, we have the partners from ethics law or from the social science part to manage, to give a clear boundary on which data you can collect, which purpose, which use, and have a clear idea. I think in that sense, your proposal will be more convinced, and that can help you to get more possible success.
Thanks. Dave?
Yeah, I'll move that transition a little bit about how do we support these patient groups. So I think there's 2 things and I'm speaking now with that sort of startup hat on. There's 2 things that I've really seen in sort of trying to or seeing the sort of healthcare marketplace. One is, I think, the idea of patient involvement, that's entrenched now. So I think, you know, that's just part of the game. The challenge is, you know, is it representative? So if you look at healthcare systems, I can talk to people in Hillingdon and get and learn about a particular patient group, but is it the same as a similar group on the outskirts of Manchester or a rural group in Devon? And these can often be quite different healthcare communities. And the other thing to think about in that sort of balance in supporting these communities, or this diverse set of communities, which is our country, it is really how do we find out a little bit more about that? So I think one way is, you know, you can't go and find that out. Often you mine stories that people have from different parts of the country, and some of those stories have that knowledge and some of the problems within them. But then this user side is counteracted with, you know, our national health system and our social care system has got a constraint, which is typically money and staff. So a lot of the work we do at Eco Analytics is very much about how do you best position a piece of medtech to get the greatest value. And a lot of it is a bit like Jerry said earlier, it's not all the great new stuff. It's often working out, why are theatres cancelled? Why do people not turn up to clinics? Why do we get disparity in childbirth in different groups? Mainly because the systems that we're giving them are not particularly good for that community. There's lots of these types of things which are quite interesting to do. And then the last point I would make is, so the user stuff is embedded. You have to really understand that health economic, or the value that the buyer of your idea is going to see. So why should they bother funding it or taking it further? And the last experience I would have is in this sort of space is demo early and demo a lot, because as you build things, and this is all tech, you know, if you've been in technology for longer, it was a very structured process where you defined it up front and built it. Now we're in a world which is a lot more natural development and pivoting technologies to, you know, you might build something, it doesn't quite work in that community, and you pivot and change it slightly for another. So it's that flexibility. And again, users are embedded in that process.
Thanks so much, Dave. I took two things I'm taking
sorry,
from...
can I just add something in? Because obviously there's been obviously already a lot of talk around, you need to get patients involved, talk to patient communities. In what way? How do you do this? So it would be worth the participants just having a look. So there's an organisation called Patient Focused Medicines Development, PFMD, and they have a really fantastic patient engagement toolkit. So they have it for various different stakeholders. So there's one for pharma companies, for instance. They do have one for medtech and digital health companies. And it has things like, what are the kinds of things you should be thinking about, patient engagement, quality guidance, tools and resources, because sometimes, even though it's really easy to talk about, we should be getting patients involved throughout, from end to end. Often the reasons for not involving patients are things like, we don't know how to, we don't know where to find them, we don't know, you know, how to work with patients, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the resource. But there is support out there. And so it's not a case of, well, just you need to do this and you're on your own. There is tools, there is resources, there is support out there. So I would really recommend, you know, people check it out to give them an idea around how they can be involving patients, and yeah, and just have a bit of guidance and support in being able to do that.
Thanks, Tricia. In fact, this brings us to very important questions here. A lot of discussions we've had here involved actually working with patients, working with other collaborators, working with other partners. So I'm going to ask maybe questions. This is a general question to everyone. Maybe I start with Jerry. From your perspective, how have you sort of been working with partners with outside the organization that you work with in terms of developing some of these projects? Any experience around that?
So the whole model that we developed at HDR UK was a partnership model. When we set up the organization back in 2018, we deliberately didn't go with a model of we'll do it all. So it's been the intention of a fairly open approach to partnership, of looking for collaborators across the academic sector. So don't think just Brunel, think look out, reach out, across the industry sector. And I say that that's very important, but I'll come back with a caveat in a minute, a little bit on that. But also across the not-for-profit sector. So there are quite a lot of the charity sector is a very rich area of collaboration. Keeping on the theme of patients, there are some very strongly motivated patient communities out there because this affects their day-to-day lives. So that some of those have very rich sets of data, highly consented data. So you're not dealing with communities where you've got an issue of consent over the data, and really passionately want to look for solutions in their area. So think of the charity sector as well. So be very much open to collaboration. Industry, it's really important you look for that collaboration, but make sure that collaboration doesn't look like we're giving away what we're doing. There is concern over collaboration with industry, particularly and I've spent quite a lot of my career in sort of large tech companies, but you've got to make sure that what you're doing is very much for the patient benefit and doesn't look like it's just for the benefit of large tech. So do it. The other thing to be aware of is, and one of the things I didn't mention in the introduction, is I sit on a lot of UKRI grant panels. Do be also aware where grants can go. There are very different rules for most grants when it comes to SMEs versus large tech. SMEs may well be eligible funding, large tech may well not be eligible for funding. So you need to have those in mind. Today, if you look at a grant, the last grant panel I sat on, which is about 2 months ago, every single successful application on that panel was multi-institutional. There was not a single one that went through that was there were some applications, but none of the successful ones were single institutions. So you need to build your partnerships, be open to those partnerships, and just that's to a large extent a networking thing as well.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, this brings me to thanks so much, Jerry, for that. This brings me to when you talked about two things, Jerry, here. One is being kind of more institutional. And I'm going to add another thing there in what I call multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary. Homie, I'm going to ask you because it's now like becoming a norm that we need to integrate that into our research work. How have you sort of, as part of establishing partnership and collaboration, how have you sort of integrated this thing about multi-institutional and multidisciplinary?
Yes, thank you. And so for our project, so one is funded by British Heart Foundation. So that project, before we submitted the proposal, we have visited Hartfield Hospital for many times. So basically, at the beginning, we have some ideas, and then we visit them for the discussion, and then we have finalized and see all the requirement. Sometimes it's difficult because they talk some language we don't understand. We talk something they don't understand. But when we have more and more communication, and we see the device, and they are very useful for them, they want to have this device. So we developed the proposal together. And during the project, so we work very close, and also has lots of visiting, discussion, and gradually in the process, we have many different requirements from them. We said, oh, can you solve this? Can you solve that? So gradually we have more and more questions. We have provided more and more solutions. So we feel that the collaboration is getting better and better. And recently they provide another question about the blood testing. How can we do the fast blood testing? So we discussed this. We use some technology for COVID detection. So we are thinking about combine them together. So we apply a small funding from EFRC and we got it. So for how to use that, also collaborated with them. So I think the more communication is better, interaction is better, and gradually if we work close and they can make lots of things new.
Thanks so much. Dave, how are you?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of sort of stories to this in the space of collaboration. So I think the thing is collaboration as an SME, as a startup, is a learning opportunity. So the more people you collaborate with, you learn and you develop the knowledge about your product. We're quite unusual as a startup, so we're profitable, and we've never had an Innovate grant. So the profit's been driven by customer revenues, which is also quite useful. You know, it's quite a tough way to grow a business, but the advantage of that is that you're working with people, and that learning is invaluable because that sort of drives your development of your idea and what elements of the idea are particularly strong. I think the others, I'll pivot over to the other side and think about my academic role. Over the last 5 years, I've had many clinicians who've come to me with a great idea for an app or a piece of AI. And often where I take them is really to make connections within their own organization, the NHS, because often they get, the idea can be very single vision, just seeing a small part of the patient pathway, where you have to start to understand the whole pathway, and just reducing, diagnostic time by 10 minutes might make no difference at all to that patient journey. So it's not worth investing in some of these types of ideas. So I think the key message is they're learning opportunities. I know Innovate grants are good, but I think from my personal experience, working with customers has been a stronger one. And even my working with clinicians with my academic hat on, great learning opportunities as well, because as you talk through some of these challenges, opportunities come out of them.
Thanks, it's great. I mean, and I think we've sort of really building interesting that our team can also take from there. I mean, Gary talked about the multi-institutional integration into that partnership building. Hermine talked about communication and also more interactions. Then David talked about learning as opportunity and knowledge building. I'm going to iteration. I guess you also work with quite a large number of partners. Right. How can we learn from your experience in terms of building those partnerships?
I think the main thing to remember is that, I mean, whilst we're talking about, obviously, ultimately things have to be patient-centered, it's not just the patient who is going to be potentially using this, potentially involved, potentially have an interest in it. So I've been involved in, for example, the development of apps, solutions, devices, where the patients are actually really on board. So you've got an app, for example, where you can input patient-reported outcomes. But actually, ultimately, the clinician also needs to be able to use it, because there's no point in the patient creating all of this great data and having this wonderful app if their consultant isn't on board with actually using what's being generated and can't use it, doesn't understand the back end, and all of that. So I think it's also about when you're developing these ideas, you really need to look at who are the potential stakeholders, and then get everyone. And this is the other thing which I really believe in when it comes to partnership working, get everyone around the table. Because when you have, for example, conversations where you've got patients and clinicians in the same room, it becomes often very obvious how the clinicians think they know what the patients want, but actually that's not actually what the patients want, and vice versa. So I would say, you know, when you've identified those different stakeholders, whether it's clinicians, patients, patient organizations, whether it's, you know, the third sector, whether it's industry. And when you're talking about industry, it's not just, for example, specific digital health companies. It might be tech companies that are now moving into health, because there's a slight difference. Pharma companies, there are lots of pharma companies that are also working on digital solutions now as well. So I think it's really about having that broader view and not being scared of getting everyone around the table at the same time, so that we can have those conversations together, rather than, okay, I'm going to go and talk to the patients now, then I'm going to go and talk to the clinicians, then I might go and talk to somebody in industry, then I'm going to go and speak to somebody in a patient organization. That's really crucial for me. And actually, you know, most of the projects that I work in, where it's multi-stakeholder, it is partnership working throughout. There are no sort of, we've got one bucket here, one bucket here, one bucket here, because that's where you get the most rich and fruitful and valuable conversations happening.
Yeah, I mean, Trisha, I just want to ask you, I mean, follow-up question to that before we open the floor to the participants to ask questions. Often, I mean, from my experience, I do similar work like that, where you bring all the stakeholders together. Often we have issues around power relations, how you manage power, whose voice should be heard, right, in your project as well as in design. How, I mean, any experience around that?
Yes, so some of that is around managing expectations. It's around making sure that people are very aware of what you're trying to create. Sometimes it's about getting the right people involved. So, for example, you know, there may be some patients who feel intimidated by being in the same room as a clinician who is very much, I believe that I'm the clinician and I know best, etc., etc. So you also have to judge personalities and make sure that the people that you're bringing together are all on board. I would say things like making sure that it's very clear that everybody must be speaking in plain language, like no jargon, because even that in itself is intimidating. Making sure that if there are quieter voices, that you do bring them in and you do ask them. And also, so specifically, if you're talking about the patient group, there are different types of patients. Not all patients are one and the same. So, for example, somebody like me, I'm very experienced with, you know, in industry, in doing these kinds of things. And I will be able to bring something different potentially to the table than somebody who you've just randomly pulled out, let's say, randomly pulled out of a clinic, who has no experience in working with clinicians on a certain level, etc., etc. And that's where you have to think about how are you getting them involved. So it might be that if you're running an advisory board, you get a patient advocate, a patient thought leader involved. But if you're going to run a survey, that's when you can get the views of the much wider patient community. So you have to really think deeper. And that's also where capacity, resource, budgeting, you have to be thinking of all of that at the beginning. I mean, I see so often where particularly startups, they get their grants and everything, get their funding, and then realize, oh, I should be getting patients involved, I should be getting this involved, that involved, and they don't have the capacity or the resource to do it. And then it becomes very much as a tick box exercise, and you don't get the true value of that partnership working. So you really need to be thinking deeper, thinking earlier about all of this.
Thanks, good. Thank you so much. Yeah, Jerry, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, two quick comments. One of the things we've done with a number of the MRC grant panels recently is to make sure that when we have a public and patient representative on the panel, it's not one. we always have a couple of representatives, and that makes a real difference because it actually essentially gives us a little bit of a support network in the discussion and prevents a little bit of isolation. So I would say actually where you're setting up an advisory board, it's not a single person. Make sure you get a small group. So that's a really important thing. The second thing I'd just like to add from a technology point of view is you need to partner locally while you're working out your ideas, but also have in your mind translation scale early on. I see so many really great ideas fail quickly because they might be applicable to that one small specific area or that particular trust, but they haven't thought about how you scale up it. And that may be the problem you're trying to solve, maybe just local. But if you're thinking of solving something more general, NHS is a big, complex, diverse organization. So think about how you scale out at the beginning, because otherwise you may well have a great idea, but it's just not going to hunt.
Yeah, Dave, let me thank you. I mean, Jerry, Dave, let me come to you from the technology perspective. You work with, I mean, different sort of groups. How do you manage that sort of power relations in terms of people who absolutely have no idea about the technology versus those who do have, if you put them all in the same room?
Is that one to me, Stephen?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that is it. I think this is not any different to any software project. You always have diverse sets of people with different perspectives, and I think Trishna mentioned it earlier. It's also being able to reach out to the quiet voices and think of what sort of techniques can you use to balance that power dynamic, so that it's about what I mentioned earlier, getting the best knowledge to direct your decision making going forward. So it's really thinking about that. It's very hard to generalize because every meeting you go into is another set of people with different characteristics and different age group. You know, all of these things play into it. So I think my mechanism when I'm doing commercial work with it is to just have a set of tools, you know, that I'm ready to use when I'm in those environments, so that it just doesn't become whoever speaks loudest gets their opinion across, and sort of use some of those tools. And you know, I know some people are on the call who've done lots of who've done and teach user experience, and there's lots of UX type tools for trying to get people involved and understanding problems and designing together. And there's lots of great tools to actually design with users and potential patients or clinicians, and really get them embedded within it. So I think it's about you know, hearing all voices, but then getting that sort of engagement, and you don't know who's got the best idea that's going, you know, that's not obvious. So that is the challenge, isn't it? Making sure that they're surfaced.
Yeah, great. I mean, just in 1 minute. Yeah, how have you cope with that, so that we move to the audience questions?
Yeah, so I think the most time we draw some pictures, so diagrams. It's a better efficient way to let them understand what we are doing. And also for the social science in the proposal development, and we also have make something, draw some pictures to show them what exactly we want, which kind of data we will collected, and what the use for the data and so on. So we just try to use some easy way to like pictures or the images or diagrams to show, as make it the communication a bit easier. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, thanks everyone. Thanks Trishna, thanks Jerry, and thanks Homi. So I'm going to open the part, I mean, the floor now for those who want to ask questions to the panelists. I think it's an opportunity to learn, I mean, from this really great experienced people. You can either raise your hand up, or you can just type whatever questions you want to ask. Yes, Zia. see if I can just allow.
Hello?
Yes, please.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, great. Thank you, first of all. I think to the panel, it was really, really interesting hearing all of this, and I think there's a lot of value to probably gain. I have a bit of a particular question. I'm not sure if it's the right time to ask this, but so I do apologize in advance. In the context of digitizing an existing kind of paper-based system that's already being used in the NHS, and getting patients to accept that at some point in time we have to move away from paper-based work to try and make things more efficient, try and make things more transparent in that sense. I've faced a lot of difficulty in having that argument, because a lot of patients are really, really interested in keeping the clinical touch to whatever process it is that you're looking on. There's always difficulty in accepting that I'm not confident in having a digital system decide on whatever it is their health particulars are. So I don't know what your experiences have been in that argument, if any at all. And again, I do apologize if this is the wrong time to be asking any of this, but thanks. Hello?
Yeah.
Shall I kick off? I can kick off with that one. So firstly, I completely understand reticence, because particularly when you're living with long-term conditions and there's things which are being done the same way all the time, having something change can be very very unnerving for someone, especially when they're trying. It's your health that you're talking about. One thing that I think is incredibly important in order to increase levels of acceptance is to not just hand somebody a solution and say, okay, this is what we're changing to. You need to have the right education and support and training around it, because that's really where you will help people to gain that confidence, gain that comfortability. I'm going to use a very simple example. My mum is not tech savvy at all. And during COVID, our GP surgery switched to a purely online booking system. She couldn't use it. She felt like her power had been taken away. She felt like she wasn't in control. She felt like her independence had been removed, because she had to rely on somebody else in order to book an appointment for her. There had been absolutely no support given for people who weren't tech savvy, didn't have access to technology, weren't comfortable. It was we've changed to this system, here you are. That's where you start putting up a lot of barriers. So I'd say if your solution or whatever it is that you're working on is looking at digitizing something that has been paper-based and it's something that people are used to, within that, you need to be thinking about the education and the support, and potentially an alternative, because we know that yes, whilst we do need digital, it's not necessarily the be all and end all. What happens if that system fails, for instance? We always need to have an alternative. And there will be people who, it doesn't matter how much training and support you give them, they will still want an alternative. So again, having an option there. But I think that really, really crucial, and I don't see it enough, is having that support and that education, and not just handing something to someone and saying, well, this is it, and just implementing it.
I'll also add a little bit to that, Zia. I think it's always about, I think with these sort of paper to app or paper to digital, you have to be able to explain the value of what you're doing to a patient. And there has to be value there, because remember, if you're investing in this new digital intervention that you're proposing, why are we doing it? There has to be either a health benefit or a cost benefit to the health system. And if the user, whether it's the clinician or the patient, understands that, that's the starting point. And once you've passed that starting point, it's then education, isn't it? So I think Trishna talked about that. It's either getting them ready early for this transition, and there's lots of literature on transition to new technologies and acceptance and things like this. But I think the underpinning advice I would give is make sure you have that value story to the different stakeholders, easy to articulate. If it's just a straight replacement, people will automatically think, well, I'd rather stay with paper, or you're going to get a lot of that kickback if you don't have those arguments.
Stephen, I just want to interject that there are questions in Q&A as well as chat.
I've seen those questions. I just wanted it there.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, by the way. I apologize. Yeah. Thank you. Very, very useful.
Thanks, dear, for that really wonderful question. So we've got a couple of questions also in the Q&A as well. I will start with the first from Carol. It says, of selecting problem statement that has positive impact on patients, practitioners, and the funding organization at the same time. There are several unresolved issues that could be listed, but how can we ensure that the problem we choose benefit all stakeholders equally and with high priority? Anyone should start with that. So it's about really how can we ensure that the problem that we address
I can start.
Yeah,
I can start with it from.
Thanks.
I think in sort of health, there's something called PICO analysis, and I'll start with a couple of those. One of them is understand that population that you're going to impact. So you want quite a large impact, and then also part of this is understanding what that impact is. So is it going to improve somebody's health? So I think doing sort of making those decisions in quite a systematic way can be quite useful. It gives you a framework, and nice, particularly will particularly push you at the start to that sort of PICO analysis of any intervention.
Yep. Thanks. Anyone? How can we ensure that it benefits all patients, all stakeholders equally with high priority?
So I think something to look at is you need to, and I mean, this touches on what David has just said, is you need to understand that group, that community, who is it that it's going to impact, because actually sometimes it's not about things being equal. When I talk about diversity and representation, so something that a lot of people say, oh, we need to be able to have equal impact, equal value for everyone. Well, if you're looking, for example, let's just say you're looking at a solution that will potentially do something in sickle cell or prostate cancer. Actually, is what you're doing, is that going to have equal benefit for everybody? Because we know, for example, sickle cell is more prevalent in certain communities. So no, it's not necessarily going to be of value or benefit everyone equally. It needs to be around looking at that specific community, and within that, are you getting equal benefits? It's not about necessarily sometimes generalization, and that often gets forgotten about. I will often say, if you're looking at who's going to be more impacted by something, if you're looking at sickle cell compared to, for example, something like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's, are those communities going to look exactly the same? No, they're not. And so you need to be looking at that first before then saying, okay, who is it that's going to be benefiting? Because it's not a case of necessarily everyone equally benefiting from whatever it is you're developing.
Yeah, thanks, Tricia. Okay, we have the second question again here. This has to do with prediction of non-attendance at NHS. So thanks a lot. The prediction of non-attendance at NHS appointments has been mentioned as potentially impactful. I say this as a good example of areas where technical innovation has already happened. Example, data-driven predictions. So the question is, how do you think is this, I mean, well, it do have some obstacles what the person is trying to say there. How do you think this is hindering the progress, and what way forward would you envisage?
So let me start with that one, Stephen.
Okay.
I raised that as an example because really trying to steer a little bit people to think about things that are not clinical intervention but more service driven. Think of the things that can be quite impactful but maybe slightly less obvious. So it is a very real example. The question raises a really important point, though, of making sure that what you do can move out into real deployment, and if appropriate, generalization beyond the initial organization. And yes, absolutely, lots of things don't make it past pilot, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. Going back to something David said a short while ago, sometimes they're not actually solving the problem that's most critical. They're optimizing somewhere in the process that actually isn't the biggest bottleneck. So make sure that you're actually focused on something that's going to make tangible improvement. Because if, let's pick this example, if you've got a major problem with non-attendance at outpatients appointments, you've got to do some work initially to say, well, what do you think? What's your hypothesis here about what the problems might be? Because actually, yes, you can do some prediction off the data, and I've seen some examples of doing this. But interestingly, the example that I saw that is actually very successfully deployed in use was one that actually extended beyond the data that was available in the trust, but actually was looking at climate data for the locality, local transportation data for the locality. Because actually the problem that they realized that needed to be solved was that this was within a reasonably deprived community, and that many relying on public transport to get to their outpatients appointments. And what needed to be looked at was timing of transport, predicting it over weather patterns and things like this. So you've got to actually look at something that's going to then make a tangible benefit. Now, that is a solution that's not been deployed beyond the trust that was initially involved, but it has made very significant benefits. It's significantly improved the percentage of no-shows. You've then got to look at whether the problem you're solving is a generalizable problem. It might not even need to be, but make sure you're actually solving the right problem. Work with the service providers, in this case it was an NHS trust, to make sure it's something that can actually be deployed, not that you're going to do a great pilot, but it actually can't go into the systems that it needs to work with. And then look at other situations outside of the initial organization and see whether it works. But you've got to think of this right at the start, as I said earlier. You've got to think about the fact that you may want to go beyond the initial trust and generalize out, and you've got to think about what the implications of that are at the start.
I can add a couple of bits as well. I've done a bit of work in non-attendance just to give sort of the diversity of it. So it sounds very simple, doesn't it? People just don't attend. You know, how do we get around that? But I'll give you two examples. I've done some analysis work with testicular cancer, which affects younger, or when it does affect younger men. Quite often they go for the follow-up checks, maybe the first follow-up check, the second follow-up check, and then don't bother coming back. They think they're cured. But if it does come back, it's quite harsh, the outcomes. So I think you want them to keep coming back to those checks. And how do we get them to do that? Predicting isn't the problem. It's obvious, the groups that aren't coming in. It's what can you do to make them come back to those checks. Another one, which is different again, is maternity care. You know, there's a disparate level of maternity care and people who are turning up for scans. And you'll see that in maybe certain ethnic groups in West London who won't turn up for certain scans. And, you know, prediction, you don't need prediction to, you know, you can do it with very simple analysis, but it's how do you break that, or how do you do that? And a lot more of an educational thing. What is that scan for? Maybe it's explained in a way that is specific to that particular group. And the last point I'd make is both of those ones had people who wanted to develop a nice new app which would solve it. And then when you come to trial those particular apps and compare the app in the first case to ringing someone up, or the second case producing some material that you can give to the patients, you know, the value isn't necessarily there in the digital intervention. So it's thinking, you know, there has to be a strong case for that. But this attendance, I've given you 2 examples. There'll be hundreds of examples of very diverse reasons, and that's why this area is so challenging. And interesting.
Okay, thanks so much, Dave. We're running out of time, so we'll be shortly joining the 11 o'clock session. I just probably have maybe a quick round of closing questions. Closing remarks, maybe just 1 minute. Then we take maybe 10-minute break. Then we come back 11 o'clock for the real action. Okay, Tricia, let me just start with you. Just 1 minute, your closing remarks.
Yes, I think just as you're going away and you're moving into like the workshopping and things, I would say think deeper, think broader, think earlier about who is it that you're trying to impact, who will benefit, what is it that you're trying to solve? Is it really a problem, or is it something that some people might think is a problem, but actually it isn't? And then throughout, from start to finish, you need to think about the people that you're getting involved, the stakeholders that you're getting involved. How do you get them involved so that you're having a constant iterative process?
Thanks. Jerry?
So I totally agree with what Trishna said. One other thing I'd say is, you're developing your ideas, write it down succinctly in lay language. Can you describe what you're trying to do in really lay language? Because as you develop your idea, you're going to have to sell it to the patients, you're going to have to sell it to the funders. They're not experts. And actually, if you can't write it down in lay language, you probably don't yet have an idea that you can articulate well enough to be successful. So work through these. Hey, I'll throw out 200 words, no more than 200 words. What it is you're trying to do, the problem you're trying to solve, and the outcomes you're looking for.
Thanks so much. Hongwei?
Yeah, I think when you develop a proposal, you try to make your eye more wide open. So try to bring multidiscipline experts or partners in. For example, the last question about this low attendance, I think if you have a partner from business school and marketing or strategy management, they can give you some kind of solutions to help you to solve this problem. So if you have multiple, you think about a wide and you have multiple discipline teams, that will be much better.
Thanks so much, David.
I think I would say at this sort of startup phase, once you've identified your problem, because you're under time pressure and you can't find users, go and find as many stories about that problem, diverse stories in the media, in the newspaper. And then when you start to look at your potential solutions, use techniques like crazy eights and things where you just do lots of alternatives and give everyone the chance to try and produce lots of alternatives and discuss those. So don't focus in too early, have lots of ideas and make them problem driven. I think that would be my advice.
Thank you so much for our panel, and thank you for the participant. Sidem, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. This was a great panel. We've learned so much from all of you. We will give a break now. We will continue at 11. If you're a participant and you don't have a link to the next meeting, Teams, do send me a message and I will make sure that you can join us. But all of you should have a link to the next meeting if you are a participant or a mentor in the hackathon. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in 10 minutes time, and let's conclude this one. Thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for everyone.